Mr. Braley of Iowa votes aye.
To 179, the nays are 234. The amendment is not adopted. There being no further business under the rule, the committee rises. I take this. The whole House of the State of the Union has had under consideration H.R. 2561 and pursuant to House Resolution 369. I report the bill back to the House with sundry amendments adopted and ready to hold.
624. The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House in the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration the bill H.R. 2551 and, pursuant to House Resolution 359, reports the bill back to the House with sundry amendments adopted in the Committee of the Whole. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered. Is a separate vote demanded on any amendment reported from the Committee of the Whole? If not, the Chair will put them in gross. The question is on the adoption of the amendments. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The amendments are adopted. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill making appropriations for the legislative branch for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2012, and for other purposes.
The question is on passage of the bill. Under Clause 10 of Rule 20, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
A vote on final passage now of legislative branch spending for the coming fiscal year. It's about $3 billion, and that is 6% less than last year. It cuts spending for the House, the Library of Congress, and a number of other agencies. The budget for the U.S. Capitol Police is also considered, but it is exempt from cuts. Special order speeches will wrap up the week here in the House. This is a 15-minute vote on final passage. General speeches in the Senate right now. Many senators coming to the floor to talk about the debt and federal deficit talks. That debate expected to continue into the weekend. A Saturday session is expected, and you'll be able to follow that debate on our companion network, C-SPAN 2. Just a short time ago, the Senate voted to halt any further debate on the cut, cap, and balance bill. That party line vote was 51 to 46. That measure passed in the House earlier this week. The vote was 234 to 190, with 5 Democrats voting in favor. The Senate may also consider the FAA bill that was passed in the House yesterday, and that would extend a number of airport and ticket fees and taxes. The current extension expires today. Once again, you can see live coverage of the Senate on our companion network, C-SPAN 2. While this final passage vote is in session, or underway, we'll get remarks now from members of the House Republican Conference earlier today, where they talked about the debt and deficit reduction talks. This is about 10 minutes.
Really? Morning, everyone. Just a happy warrior today on behalf of cut, cap, and balance. You know, the House has done its job. You know, we've given the President an increase in the debt ceiling of $2.4 trillion, which would take us at least the next 18 months. For that, we're asking for real cuts in spending and a balanced budget amendment. So the House has done its job, and I hope the Senate will do theirs. And if they don't like our version of cut, cap, and balance, guess what? That's what the legislative process is for. They can amend it. They can change it. They can send it back over to the House. And frankly, they ought to take action on that bill. With regard to yesterday, I'm going to say it one more time. There was no agreement, publicly, privately, never an agreement, and frankly, not close to an agreement. And so I would just suggest that it's going to be a hot weekend here in Washington, D.C.
Morning. I just want to echo what the Speaker said. You know, I know that the American people are tired and they want to see results. They want to see resolution to this debt ceiling issue and want to see really some productivity here in Washington. And if you look at it, we've done and continue to do the work of the American people in the House. We've sent a budget. We passed our budget. We've sent jobs bills over to the Senate. We have passed a bill that deals with the problem facing this country in the debt ceiling discussion and cut, cap, and balance. What has the Senate done? When is Harry Reid going to put forward his ideas? You know, Harry Reid keeps saying that somehow the House won't work with him. Where are his ideas? When is the Senate going to act? When is it that they're going to show the American people they're willing to do the job that they were sent here to do?
You heard from the Speaker and the Leader, and you might hear the same thing from all of us, because this conference is very, very united. It's not just a Republican conference. We've had a short opportunity for the American public to see what cut, cap, and balance is all about. You look at the CNN poll, when they look at the debt limit, they want to see a balanced budget amendment. There's a fundamental difference here. Not only did we say what we're for, we voted for what we're for. That's a responsibility. Some people can vote of what they're against, but you got to say what you're for. This is too big an issue for America to face. It's not just America watching it, it's also the world. If we are going to continue to lead, you have to step up to the plate. So the responsibility from the House, once again, has proven the course that not only will we say what we'll do, we'll back it up with votes and put it on the floor and send it to the Senate. The Senate has an action to take. If they do not like our action, they have to say what they're for.
In order to help create jobs, in order to save our nation from bankruptcy, the American people want to cut, cap, and balance. The House has done its work. Mr. Reid, if you don't like our plan, where's your plan? Mr. President, if you don't like our plan, where's your plan?
You know, there's a gang of 234 members in the House, a bipartisan gang of 234 members who passed a bill, cut, cap, and balance. And we believe that it is important to our economy. It's also important to protecting our excellent AAA credit rating. And we are anxious for the Senate to take action.
You know, our nation is at a historic pivot in its time, certainly in our history, and we are right at the edge of a financial cliff, if you will, and we're looking down over the side of the cliff. No rational person wants our nation to default. Certainly by what has happened in the House, we have put forward our plan, cut, cap, and balance. We know what we have to do. The American people know what we have to do. And the Senate now has to do what the House has done or offer their own plan, because this is a common sense plan. This is a measured plan. This is a bipartisan plan that's put forward by the House Republicans with quite a bit of support by Democrat colleagues as well. And so we call on the Senate now to act and to save our country, put us on the right path to fiscal prosperity and fiscal sanity.
Well, for me, this is a deja vu all over again, Yogi Berra moment, just like back in the budget debate months ago. The House Republicans are the only ones that have passed a plan. And we have passed a debt limit increase, and it's not only the best plan, it is the only plan. And all the Senate can do is demagogue our plan and refer to it as being too radical to consider. It cuts $111 billion out of the next fiscal year budget. That's like 8%, less than 8%. Every family in America, every small business has made an adjustment like that already to their books. What could be radical about that? It caps spending at 20%. Based on a 30-year average. If my kids set a goal to be average, would I consider that radical? And it requests a balanced budget amendment go to the states. Since when did letting the American people speak become radical? The Senate needs to pass cut, cap, and balance.
Since January, House Republican leaders have been telling rank-and-file members we have to pay our bills and cut up our credit cards. We've swallowed that. We have voted to raise the debt ceiling against our strongest wishes. We've also done it in a way that Standard & Poor's and Moody's said they needed. They need something structural to show the world that the full faith and credit of the United States means something. That's what cut, cap, and balance does. We have fulfilled our obligations. We're going to go upstairs and vote on matters including jobs, on our middle-income Americans to make their lives better. In the meantime, we challenge the Senate and the President. Either pass our plan or come up with your own. But the attention is not on the House anymore. Go stick your microphones in the faces of the senators and the President and say, we want to see your plan. The House is done.
Speaker Boehner, now it's July 20th. Mr. Speaker, it's been reported that you're considering eliminating the mortgage interest tax deduction through the debt limit deal. Are you going to support that?
That's never been discussed.
So you wouldn't support that?
The Senate's voting right now to table cut, cap, balance. So realistically speaking, I know you're a happy warrior at the moment, but what's next? What's the way forward? Because it's not going to pass.
If they don't like our version of cut, cap, and balance that two-thirds of the American people support, then what's their plan? They can make amendments to it and send it back over.
Mr. Boehner?
You know, right now, since we're running out of time, and obviously you need time to write, score, and pass a bill.
That's why the House acted earlier this week to actually pass a bill that would increase the debt limit.
But at what point does a short-term deal become a necessity to avert anything that happens on August 3rd?
It is not what the goal here is. As I said yesterday, there are two challenges that we have to overcome. We have to raise the debt ceiling, and we have to have a serious down payment on reducing our budget deficit and our debt.
Mr. Speaker, given the stakes here, are you willing to make the kind of tough choices, if you have a chance to get a deal you think really accomplishes something, the kind of tough choices that could even put your speakership in jeopardy?
Listen, I've been pretty clear all year that we would not increase the debt limit without serious cuts in spending and serious changes to the way we spend the American people's money. And I'll just assure you that whatever comes to the floor will meet that test.
Mr. Speaker, can you walk us through a little bit in these negotiations with the White House and the others about what some of this shared sacrifice might look like? You know, we hear these reports about, you know, health care reform.
There is no agreement. There's no deal in private. Our plan is cut, cap, and balance. Now, I don't know what the Senate will do or not do, but as a responsible leader, I think it's my job to keep the lines of communication open. I've talked to Democrat leaders in the House and the Senate, Republican leaders, and I've talked to the White House about keeping lines of communication open. But at the end of the day, we have a spending problem. Somebody's got to get serious about cutting spending. And our friends across the aisle aren't at all serious about doing what the American people are demanding. Spend less. Bye.
Is a big deal possible by August 2nd?
Is there going to be need for a short-term extension?
House Republican leaders earlier today on debt and deficit talks. House Democrats were expected to have remarks on those negotiations and jobs today. That was set for 1 o'clock this afternoon. It's been rescheduled for Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, in the meantime, has said that there will not be weekend sessions in the Senate. As reported earlier, Senate negotiators continue with their work on the federal deficit behind closed doors. Once again, no Senate session this weekend. And very quickly, President Obama is holding a town hall meeting right now on the debt and deficit. He's at the University of Maryland. This started about 10 minutes ago. You can see this live on C-SPAN 3. In the meantime, members of the House voting on final passage of legislative branch spending for the coming fiscal year. This will wrap up legislative business for the House for this week.
On this vote, the yeas are 252, the nays 159, with no answering present. The bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet on Monday next, when it shall convene at 10 a.m. for morning hour debate and noon for legislative business.
Without objection, so ordered.
These are the ones that do.
The chair will now entertain requests for 1 minute. For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek? Without objection. The gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise this afternoon to honor a great citizen, a good friend, and a wonderful political leader, Rhode Island Governor Bruce Sunland, who passed away last evening. My fellow Rhode Islanders and I have lost a great friend and a great leader in Bruce's passing. He will be long remembered for leading Rhode Island through some very difficult times. His commitment to public service and his honorable and courageous service to our country, both at home and abroad, set him apart as a great American. Governor Sunland distinguished himself as a patriotic war hero, a talented business leader, a spirited athlete, and a gifted political leader. A great friend to me, his courage and passion set him apart as one remarkable man whose spirit will live on in our memories. His legacy and visionary accomplishments, including leading Rhode Island out of the credit union crisis, establishing Right Care, a national model for health care for low-income families and children, and his vision for our state's airport expansion at T.F. Green, will continue to benefit Rhode Islanders for many years to come. My thoughts and prayers continue to be with the entire Sunland family. Governor Bruce Sunland will be sorely missed. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Are there any further requests for 1 minute recognition? For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas rise? Seek recognition. Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I'm excited about the number of members who welcome guests to the United States Capitol. It is an important place because it belongs to the American people. I'm delighted that the Poindexter family has joined me. But many of those people who have traveled by airplanes and have gone through the nation's airports. I am the ranking member on the Transportation Security Committee addressing security issues across America. And I am disappointed, but I would like to say a little outraged, that right now the FAA bill is held up on minor issues such as whether or not we'll allow our workers to engage in discussions about their work conditions. It is being held up because the bill cancels FAA and air traffic controllers in small airports and the supplemental support, if you will, the supplemental support that has been given to small airports in rural areas. It's time to get to work. Our Republican friends need to stop holding up this bill for minor issues so that Americans can fly in safety and security. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair lays before the House the following personal request.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. Griffith of Virginia for today.
Without objection, the request is granted. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I promise I will not take the whole 60 minutes because I know many folks have flights to get to. Madam Speaker, one of the reasons I'm here, and actually we're also working on some additional, shall we say, display items for maybe next week. Maybe I'm out of my mind, but this last couple of weeks I've been actually reading from top to bottom, beginning to end, the Medicare trustees, federal hospital insurance, and federal supplemental medical insurance trust funds actuarial report for 2011. And it's actually more interesting than you would think, because you go through about 270-some pages Lots of great information, not that hard to read. So anyone that's actually watching this, strongly suggest, if you have the stomach for it and you really need a little help in falling asleep, this might be the occasion where go Google it, go take it off the internet, but do this for me. This is one of those occasions I'm going to ask you to go to the very end of the report and start with the last 3 pages, because that's what I'm standing here to talk about. Is you have a report that basically gives a window of a dozen-some years of actuarial soundness. But when you get to the last 3 pages, it basically says something like Rosanna, Dana, whatever that character from Saturday Night Live from 20 years ago. Never mind. And I brought a couple of the boards we already had printed up to sort of demonstrate what's going on. And then I wanted to talk about this. Day after day after day after day in the political theater of this Congress, I see members walk up to the floor, walk up to press, send out press releases saying, we don't want to change Medicare as it is in law today. How many times have we heard the attacks on the Republicans saying they're trying to change Medicare as we know it? I need you to think about that comment, because what's in this report is Medicare as it is in law today. You need to understand what the left is defending and the crash that is just a few years away. And I'm standing here today to defend the fact that as Republicans, we're saving the program. We're actually trying to find a way to make it Medicare actuarially sound so you and I can have it, but also our kids and our grandkids can have it. So let's actually first walk through the numbers, and then I'm going to read parts of these last 3 pages, and I promise it's more interesting than it sounds, and it's more depressing than you can ever imagine, and this is the current law. All right, so a couple of primers on some spending out there. 2010, how much of our spending is mandatory? 2016, you'll start to notice mandatory spending is consuming everything we are. Another point of reference, today, when we borrow, we're actually having to borrow to cover all of discretionary. That's defense, that's all the alphabet agencies. We even have to borrow today to cover a portion of the mandatory spending. Think of that. The Medicares, the Social Securities, the Medicaids, the VA benefits, interest on the debt are actually living on borrowed money. I would think that would set off an alarm bell in someone's head that there's something horribly wrong out there. So let's actually bounce on to this graph and just sort of give you a concept of how fast these numbers are eroding and why things like the battle over cut, cap, and balance are going on in this body. Because there seems a willingness here by many members, and I've got to be very careful how I phrase this, that I believe telling the public the truth of how difficult these numbers are and how dangerous they are to our republic may mean they don't get reelected. May mean they have to stand up in front of an audience that for years and years and years they've said, don't worry, it's fine. How do you go back in front of that same audience and now tell them, well, maybe the numbers weren't fine? Because the truth is in front of us right now. Here's the 2010 sort of breakdown. Department of Defense, military, other discretionary. So this in 2010, we use this one because this is last year's numbers. It's all done. We know what it was. And you see this? That's probably about 62, 63% of all spending was in the mandatory category. Think of this. This here from the President's own numbers is the 2016 projections, which is 4 budget cycles away. Because remember, right now we're working on the 2012. This is the 2016. Do you see the difference in these two boards? And see if I can hold these up over each other. Do you see that growth in that blue area? We go from something in the low 60s to 72, and I have one person keeps telling me it's 73% of all spending. But think of this, in about 13 and a half years, every dime of this pie chart, every dime of spending will be consumed by the mandatory portion of our spending. So 13 and a half years. There's nothing left in defense. There's nothing left in the alphabet agencies. Mandatory spending, the entitlements consume everything we are. And remember, this is as the law is written today. So every time you see a member walk up and say, I don't want to make changes, I want to keep everything as it is in law today, they're basically saying your future is a crash. Everything will be consumed in these mandatory numbers. Now let's actually walk through a couple things that are in these last 3 pages of the 2011 Medicare Actuarial Report. And once again, please, I ask you, if you don't believe me, if you're someone who, has trouble believing these statements that I come here to the floor and try to walk through, go take it off the internet yourself and go read these last 3 pages. Part of the premise here is, to his credit, and I believe he's actually the chief actuary for Medicare, actually wrote a little statement of actuarial opinion, last 3 pages, and he puts it in perspective. And he basically says, yeah, the numbers in here are fine if you live in a fantasy world and assume Congress will never make certain changes. And understand, baked into these numbers, you'll love this one. And I'll read it and then I'll explain what this means. And this is in the second paragraph, I'm going to read the second half of this paragraph. They are not reasonable as an indication of actuarial future cost. Current law would require a physician fee reduction of an estimated 29.4% on January 1st, 2012. An implausible expectation. Okay, did you hear that? Built into these numbers, January 1st, what is that? 5 months from now? January 1st, doctors are to get a 29.4% cut in their compensation. And that's built into these numbers, because these numbers don't work without taking that type of hit to the doctors. How many doctors are going to see Medicare patients come January 2nd when they've taken a 29.4% cut? So what traditionally happens around here is the members of this body sometime in November, December, we're going to run to the floor, we're going to say that's not fair, we want to make sure Medicare recipients can actually see their doctor, and we're going to go back and raise up that compensation and keep it flat at that, we're going to get rid of that 29.4% cut that's already built into the law. And the next day, we should have a new actuarial report saying, oh, by the way, the dozen-some years that we said Medicare was fine is crashing because it's built on premises that don't have reality. I'm trying to find nice ways to phrase this. When you read an actuarial report, it's based on current law. What happens if built into that current law is absolute fantasy? And that 29.4% cut, which, I will be one of the people who will walk into this floor and do my best to stop that, because that's not fair. It's not fair to the doctors. It's not fair to the people in the program. But you got to understand, then when members of this body walk up here and say, we want no changes to Medicare, when they say they want no changes, are they saying they want the law as it is today? They want doctors in January to get a 29.4% cut. You can't have it both ways. You can't walk up here and say, we want to keep the law exactly as it is, no protection, no changes. Oh, by the way, you're never going to see your doctor again after January 2nd. And you have to actually go through more of these last 3 pages, this statement of opinion. It's devastating. And you start to realize the political theater around here hasn't been telling our public the truth. They're more concerned about winning political points than helping the American people understand we have a huge, important program here that's about to collapse under its own weight. We have the documents, we have the data. We're trying to step up and be responsible. But by being responsible, you get demagogued, you get attacked. You have people going out and holding up little protest signs, and then you talk to them and say, hey, read this. And they read it, and they look at you with these eyes saying, I can't believe my own side's been lying to me. Why didn't they fess up and tell us this was coming? A couple other things in here. Medicare prices for hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, home health, hospice, ambulatory surgery centers, diagnostic laboratories, and many other services would be less than half of their levels under prior law is built into this Medicare actuary report. Think that through. Built into the formulas today, those groupings are going to be receiving half the compensation. How many of them are ever going to treat, take care, diagnose, provide hospice care for a Medicare recipient? That's what the Republicans are trying to save. We're trying to fix it. We're trying not to let that happen. Anyone that says they do not want changes to Medicare, they're actually supporting the downfall of the program. And this is actually why I stand here. And I'll be back next week with a series of slides that actually break out a number of segments from this Medicare actuary report, because it's time we start having members come to this floor and tell the truth. One last little thing here that, for these reasons, the financial projections shown in this report for Medicare do not represent a reasonable expectation for actual program operations. What the Medicare actuary is basically saying is what we've based much of the rhetoric on around here. If you dig into the numbers, this program is already changed as people know it. It was changed last year when they did the health care takeover vote. It's already built into the law. As a Republican, we're trying to find ways to save this program, make it actuarial sound so it's there for the folks who are on it, for our children, for ourselves, for the next generation. We are here to do the right thing. And if you don't believe me, go pull the report and read through it yourself. Madam Speaker, thank you. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, for the remainder of the hour as a designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it's my privilege to be recognized to address you here on the floor of the House of Representatives, and I always appreciate the honor and the privilege. I, like every member in this Congress and most Americans, have some strong opinions about the workings and the necessity for this Congress to step up and lead, as we have led, on the issue of the debt ceiling. And I'd start with this. Some weeks ago, let's say weeks ago, the Secretary of the Treasury, Tim Geithner, laid out a date, and he said August 2nd is a hard break deadline beyond which we can't extend our borrowing and our spending, and that the government will not be able to pay its bills and we'll have to default on our debt. That, I think, Madam Speaker, is an irresponsible statement on the part of the Secretary of the Treasury, and we should keep in mind that his first boss is the President of the United States. And so the things that come out of the mouth of the Secretary of the Treasury often reflect the best interests of the President and perhaps an explicit or implied directive that comes from the President. And I happen to have this belief that when someone goes to work for the President, their judgment becomes what they think the President would do if he happened to be doing their job. I've watched the transition of executive offices over the years in places like the governor's office in Iowa, where I come from and served in the Iowa Senate before I came here. I watched as the transition in the executive branch took place, and I watched as some of the people that survived the transition did so by accommodating their positions to that of their new chief executive officer, their new governor. I've watched as this United States of America has transitioned from a George W. Bush administration to a Barack Obama administration. And I've watched as some of the survivors of that transition accommodated their positions to their new president, their new commander-in-chief. So I'm a little cynical about the knowledge base and what is declared to be the deep convictions of some of the appointees of the president. When I hear the Secretary of the Treasury say this August 2nd date is a date beyond which we can't go, we can't borrow beyond that, and so we'll have to start defaulting on our debt. Why does Tim Geithner say that? I say he does because that accommodates to the President's argument that this we've got a put up or shut up date and that it's a hard date, August 2nd, beyond which is a financial calamity. I don't believe that, Madam Speaker. I don't believe we get a financial calamity if we go on the other side of August 2nd. It may be a fairly accurate, calculated date beyond which we won't have the borrowing capacity to continue to pay our bills on time. I think that's probably close to August 2nd. I don't know that it's the accurate date of August 2nd, however. And so I just caution people to think about what it really means when you hear a cabinet official take a position and promise Americans that they can count on their word. No, they're sometimes falling on their sword for the President of the United States. In fact, the Secretary of the Treasury, Tim Geithner, doesn't give me a lot of confidence. Just a few weeks ago, as he was under oath before the Small Business Committee, I asked him his opinion on several of the top economists that America and the world has produced throughout history. And a couple of those people would be Adam Smith and John Maynard Keynes. And the Secretary of the Treasury, Tim Geithner's response was, and I remind you, Madam Speaker, under oath, his response was he's not an economist. Therefore, he wouldn't offer an opinion on lead economists in the history of the country and the world because he's not a trained economist. So when Tim Geithner tells us that we have a deadline of August 2nd and it's a potential calamity, is he giving us an economic opinion? He refused to give an economic opinion when he was under oath, so when he's in front of the press, is that a different equation? Is he an economist or isn't he? He says he's not. If he says he's not, then should I accept his word that the Secretary of the Treasury is not an economist? Therefore, I would have to tell you, Madam Speaker, I would discount his opinion because he's a self-professed non-economist. And it seems as though America wants to accept the word of the Secretary of the Treasury, even though he has put disclaimers out there on his own credibility multiple times. And I've just put another disclaimer out there on his own credibility by saying the President of the United States impacts the opinions of his cabinet members and his other appointees. And so here's what the President has said, Madam Speaker, and that's this. He said, in so many words, speaking of this, he said, I can't guarantee that the pensions of our military or the Social Security of our seniors will be paid on time. That was a statement that he made a little over a week ago. And yet, I listened to that. And, Madam Speaker, I have to tell you, there wasn't a directly factual statement made by the President. He has to know this. He has to know the truth. The truth is the President of the United States is the only person that can guarantee that our military pensions are paid on time, and he's the only person that can guarantee our Social Security is paid on time. He's the only person that can guarantee that the revenue stream that's coming in, which is $200 billion a month on average, would be used in a priority fashion to service our debt, to pay our military on time, to pay the military pensions on time, to take care of our national security interests, to pay the Social Security on time, and to pay the Medicare bills on time. Take the seniors off the table, along with our military, as I have clearly advocated when I introduced the Promises Act a little over a week ago. The Promises Act pays our military first, services our debt second. Goes no further than that. We did a major press conference on that issue, myself, Congressman Gohmert, and Michelle Bachmann of Minnesota. We laid that principle out. There are others that have good bills out here. Tom McClintock has a good bill that requires that we service our debt, pay the debt on time. It's called the Full Faith and Credit Act. It's mirrored, I believe, off of that of Pat Toomey in the Senate. It has a good number of co-sponsors. Louis Gohmert has a good bill that guarantees that our troops are paid on time every time. It doesn't go far enough. It's got a sunset date on it. It doesn't happen to include hitting a debt ceiling. It addresses the funding gap that came from the CR a few months ago. But the concept of it is good, and he's led very well on it. Dan Webster from Florida has a very good prioritization bill. His bill, and should we send it to the President and it becomes law, services the debt first. That's about $20 billion a month. Pays the military second. That's about $11 billion a month. And now that's $31 billion. If you divide $31 billion by 200 billion, 31 divided by 200 works out to be 15.2%. So 15.2% of the incoming revenue stream is all that it takes to guarantee that our military are paid on time every time, and that they in harm's way, defending our liberty with their lives on the line and sacrificing their lives from time to time. They should never have to wonder if their earned paycheck is going to be transferred into their account for their family on time every time. That should be a guarantee that this Congress makes, and it should be a guarantee that lasts for all time. My bill does that. I believe the language in Daniel Webster's bill does that as well. But in any case, his services the debt first, pays the military second, provides that the President can direct funding into national security issues third, pays the Social Security fourth, and the Medicare bills fifth. I actually think his is the best bill. I would take it and massage it and flip a couple things within it. But I'm not taking a deep objection to it, nor do I think that we wouldn't get the job done with Dan Webster's bill. I think we would. But I would like to see a prioritization bill be moved here on the House of Representatives and send it over to the Senate. We've already passed cut, cap, and balance. We've said, here's the debt ceiling increase. You send a constitutional amendment to the states so they can ratify an amendment that guarantees that this Congress would be bound to a balanced budget. The balanced budget amendment passed here in this House in 1995. And it was messaged down that hallway to the Senate in 95. And it was brought up on the floor of the Senate with the votes counted for passage. And one senator flipped unexpectedly, and the balanced budget amendment failed on the floor of the Senate that day in 95. Had that balanced budget amendment passed, it would have been messaged to the states for ratification, and it requires 3/4 of the states to ratify a constitutional amendment, which clearly would have been the case for a balanced budget amendment. Had the states had that opportunity, I believe they would have ratified a balanced budget amendment. Had they done so, I believe, Madam Speaker, that we would have not be having this discussion today. I believe that we would have it enshrined in our Constitution a requirement that this Congress be bound by the same standards that most of the states are, balanced budget amendments. And if that had been the case, we would not be having this discussion. We wouldn't have this overspending. We wouldn't have more than $3 trillion in deficit spending that's been driven by the President of the United States. And some say Republicans are responsible too. Republicans spent too much money too. And in that case, I'd agree with that. But here's the real comparison, and it's this. During the height of the Iraq War, with expenses going out in armed conflict in the Middle East, when things were going badly there, this Congress came within $160 billion of balancing the budget. A little bit more economic activity, a little tweak here or there, and we would have seen a balanced budget in the middle of the past decade, in the middle of the Iraq War. We fell $160 billion short. All right, I'll take that on us. We should have done a better job. We should have had enough cushion that we achieved a balanced budget. We didn't get that done. But today, the President's deficit is $1.65 trillion. And I no longer have to say trillion with a T. I used to have to say billion with a B. Sometimes people were thinking million when you said billion. But now we talk about trillions, then the concept of we don't have to say trillion with a T anymore. It comes out of our mouths because we're discussing trillions of dollars. So the President has given us a $1.65 trillion single-year deficit, more than 10 times greater than the $160 billion deficit that Republicans had during the height of the Iraq War. That's his responsibility. Over $3 trillion in deficit spending in 2 short budget years. By the way, no budget approved by Democrats during that period of time. Nothing brought up in the Senate now. We did pass a Ryan budget. We voted on an RSC budget. I stuck with the toughest and the strongest budget that we could bring to this floor, one that balanced in less than 9 years. I'm a little embarrassed to say that. I'm a little embarrassed to say a budget that balances in less than 9 years. But it's easier to say that than it is a budget that balances in 26 years. And that's the budget that Democrats voted against because it didn't spend enough money. The Ryan budget balances in 26 years. When my sons are ready for retirement, that's too long. I want something much shorter than that. I'd like to find a way to balance this budget tomorrow if I could, but the price to do that would be too many calamities across this country. So we need to get there as fast as we can before the financial markets leave us. We need to get there before we become the Greece of the world. This isn't going to wait 26 years to be resolved, and if you want to push the American economy and our credit over the edge, just adopt the ideas that come out of the Democrat side of the aisle or out of the Harry Reid majority in the Senate. The idea is that we should extend the debt ceiling without restraint. Whatever the President asks for, give it to him. Let him borrow and spend money, and somehow or another the magic of Obamonomics is going to create this huge economic chain letter of spending. There's always another sucker in a chain letter, isn't there? And the President believes that. He believes there's always another sucker in a chain letter, and so he wants to borrow and borrow and borrow and spend and spend and spend, and take something like FDR's New Deal to the infinite power and apply it to today's economy, and somehow the magic of the consumer-driven economy will save us from our lack of discipline, and the economy will start to grow again. I'll submit, Madam Speaker, another viewpoint on this. I think this last summer was not recovery summer as it was declared to be by the President of the United States. Nobody is saying this summer is recovery summer with 9.2% unemployment. I would submit instead that we have to recover from Obamonomics before we actually will be in recovery. We may have already recovered from the downward spiral of the recession that was the financial crisis that came to us in the fall of 2008. We may have already recovered from that, but we've not recovered from Obamonomics. We've not recovered from the economic stimulus plan. We've not recovered from the $3 trillion in unnecessary spending. We have interest. We have to service this debt. I think there are a good number of Americans by now that have lived through this, and on the other side of this recession that we've been in, they will be learning this again, this thing that I know from experience, and it's this. If you are too highly leveraged, another loan, borrowing more money with more interest to pay and more principal to pay, doesn't sometimes help you. Sometimes when you're too highly leveraged, you just simply have to go broke and declare that you're insolvent, and now maybe you get a chance to start again. But when businesses have been beaten down, beaten down, beaten down, and along comes a natural disaster, like, for example, to inject it into this congressional record, the natural disaster of the Missouri River floods of 2011 that go on right now. We have victims that are underwater now that are so far behind that a disaster loan at low interest rates over long terms doesn't help them because they won't be able to service their loan. They won't have the cash flow to do it. They'll just have another interest payment. They'll just have another principal payment, and it weighs them down to the point where they can't recover. This federal government could find itself in the same position. The federal government's got to pay the interest. The federal government's got to pay the principal. Who's going to pay that? The American people. It's got to come out of the profits of the private sector in order for that to happen. And when we look at the growth in government spending and government spending created jobs, when it's created from borrowed money, it's got to come from somewhere. Where does it come from? It comes from the private sector. What does the private sector produce that can be tapped by and taxed by, let's say, Tim Geithner, the IRS? Well, first of all, the federal government taxes all productivity in America. Every single thing that's productive, the federal government has figured out how to tax. If you punch a time clock in the morning, let's say Monday morning, 8 o'clock, Americans by the millions step up, punch that time clock, ka-chunk. From that instant forward, Uncle Sam has his hand out. It just comes out automatically. He hears the time clock, his hand goes out. It's like a Pavlovian reflex that comes from Uncle Sam. There's a mystical little image of Uncle Sam there beside that time clock, and when he hears that noise, it's like Pavlov's dog. When he heard the bell ring, he salivated because he got fed when the bell rang. And when the time clock kicks in, Uncle Sam's hand goes out. And all the money that you earn from that moment forward until he gets his fill goes into Uncle Sam's hand for that day. And sometime, oh, maybe if you're lucky, before noon, he gets enough of it that he can put his hand in his pocket and walk away for the day. Uncle Sam has taxed, he has punished, actually, your productivity because there's a disincentive to produce if their government's going to take your production from you and put it in their pocket. Now, we don't mind sharing some of this. I mean, we go to church and provide our donations there, and Americans are very generous people when it comes to charity. There's no one more generous than Americans when it comes to that. But it is discouraging to have the federal government take the first dollar from the first hour and every dollar from every hour until they get all that they want. But that's what happens. But out of that first lien on all productivity, and by the way, Madam Speaker, it's not just those people who punch the time clock. It's those people that work on commission, too. If your commission check is, say, 10% of what you sell, Uncle Sam's going to get his out of that before you get your commission. You all know that. If you have earnings, savings, or investment, Uncle Sam's going to get his tax out of that, too. It is a punishment for productivity. The federal government taxes all productivity in America, and they tax it first. They have the first lien on all earnings, savings, and investment in America. And then out of that, and by the way, the private sector that I'm talking about produces goods and services that have a marketable value here in this country and abroad. That's our export market. That's what has value. And the rest of all of this is just what supports it and what runs off the taxes on it. But you have to increase the productivity of your goods and services that have a marketable value domestically and abroad if you're going to recover from this economy. The private sector in America has to produce those goods and services in a volume, in a competitive way, adequate to recover now from Obamonomics, to recover from the more than $3 trillion in irresponsible spending, and it has to have enough confidence that the government's not going to step in and punish that productivity and tax that productivity by increasing taxes on it, or putting that heavy burden of regulation on it that someone put out a number here a couple of weeks ago that the annual burden of regulation is something like $1.7 trillion a year in America. I can tell you, Madam Speaker, what it was like for me when I started a business up in 1975. I didn't have any money, I didn't have any capital, but I thought I knew how to do something that had a marketable value. And I had enough confidence to step up and do that, but my fear was not that I couldn't do the work or that I couldn't market, sell my skills, or that I couldn't manage the books or fix the equipment or get it moved to the location or do the job, do all the things that were part of the function of the business that I started. My fear was that the government would come in and punish me in a way that I didn't expect. That the government would come in and maybe do an IRS audit at a time that, we all feared the IRS then. I think we do now. That happened. It happened over and over again. It looked like the IRS wanted to haunt me there for a while, and to this day, I don't think that I did anything other than comply with all of those laws. I was punished anyway. Another fear I had was, what about government regulation? How could I possibly know which government regulator would come swooping in on me and shut my business down and punish me with penalties that I couldn't anticipate? And fortunately, I was never really at that point where the regulators came in and shut me down in that fashion, but many businesses have been. The weight of this regulation, if that's the number, $1.7 trillion a year, the weight of regulation, is a tremendous amount of American capital that's consumed in trying to comply with regulators. I'd pose this question, Madam Speaker. Does anyone know of a single business in America, out of the millions of businesses that there are, and let's just say, does anyone know of a single business in America that has ever uttered a statement or put up on their website or printed a business card that would say words to the effect of, "We are in compliance with all government regulations"? Does anybody think of a single business that has made such a statement or taken such a stand? I'd say not. Now, I ask that question because it's a good question to cause us to examine why it is that no business claims that they're complying with all government regulations. And the reason is because it's impossible, Madam Speaker. Years ago, I had a task of doing seminars in 5 different states at state conventions. And one of the things that I began to do was to ask my colleagues who were in similar business, and these are self-employed people. Most of them started the business themselves. Sometimes they were second and third generation business, as King Construction is today a second generation business. But I would ask the question, how many agencies regulate our trade? Earth-moving business. How many agencies regulate our trade? And so they would say, well, the EPA does, and the DNR does, and the IRS does, and the DOT does, and the taxman does. And as we began writing that down it was a chalkboard in those days, we came to this conclusion that we were directly regulated by 43 different agencies. And so I would begin to ask the question, closed room, no press, are you in compliance with these EPA regulations? And then we'd have a long discussion about how hard it was, and they were never comfortable, even back then in the 80s, that they were in compliance with the EPA regulations, because they could always be read in a different way by the next generation of environmental extremists that would get a job. Where would you go? I mean, what if you're genetically born to be an environmental extremist? Where would you look for a job? The EPA. And wouldn't you think that you had a cause that was as worthy as the cause of your father or your mother, who advanced the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act and a number of the other environmental legislation that passed through here without a lot of restraint in the 70s, and had some justification then, and did clean up our waters and our sewers and our landfills, and continue to do so to this day? They had a cause. They were on a crusade of environmental cleanup back in the 70s, and now their children have jobs working for the EPA, and they have a belief and a conviction and a crusade that's as powerful to them as it was to their parents or their successors, the earlier generation. But, you know, we've cleaned up the environment a lot since the 70s. And most people now enjoy clean water and good sanitary sewer systems and a pretty good system of handling the waste that comes out of society. But the people that are involved as regulators don't see it that way, because they have a cause, and now they think they need to trudge forward on a cause. They'll never be satisfied, because that's what they do. So the regulations are never going to be all complied with. They keep changing the rules as you go forward. Now they want to regulate anybody that has a 1,000-gallon fuel tank has to have a storage levee or dike built around it, or some type of structural containment for that, as if there's going to be a spill in every location and it can't be cleaned up. Well, we know they can be cleaned up. We don't have a problem, but they have a solution for us regardless. That's just the EPA, and we can go on down the line. Is anybody in compliance with every IRS opinion? I mean, you know, the old story goes this way, if you want an argument, just ask 2 lawyers their opinion. Well, if you want an argument, just ask 2 representatives of the IRS their opinion, and you'll get 2 different opinions almost as a rule. Anything that's halfway as contentious, you get 2 different opinions, which means No one can be confident they're in compliance with IRS rules because the rules aren't clear enough. Even the people that enforce them can't agree on what they are. And we can go on down the line. In our state, the Department of Natural Resources, they do enforce EPA rules. There's conflicting opinions there. And the conflicting opinions go on and on and on. But, Madam Speaker, it's not just 43 agencies. It's not just 43. That's the 43 that we identified that regulate my trade back in the 80s. Now there is a website called Constitution Daily that counted these all up a couple of years ago, and they came up with 682 different agencies. Now, I'll admit, these are departments and divisions of agencies, but 682 entities that regulate in America. 682. No one person could memorize them all. It's impossible to know all the regulations that they have written. We have Obamacare now coming at us, grinding up and consuming American liberty. And what do we get out of that? 2,600 pages of legislation that the regulations at this point have reached over 8,700 pages of regulation just on Obamacare. And we saw here the other day that the CEO of Home Depot has said that he believes that Obamacare itself will generate over 150,000 pages of regulation. Now, it makes it real clear that even if you're a huge, huge corporation, you cannot analyze all of this and be sure that you're in compliance of regulations. And so what do businesses do? Well, one is they don't start up out of fear of all of this. And then, you know, who in their right mind would start up a business right now that employed 51 people for starters? They'd be under the requirement to establish the health insurance plan that the government would approve for every one of their employees. And so instead, they sit on their capital and they don't invest. And part of it is the tax burden. And another thing we know is that if this Congress doesn't act between now and the end of 2012, we're going to see a huge tax increase. That was part of the negotiations last fall that bridged us over until we get past another presidential election. So we've got a huge tax increase ahead of us when the Bush brackets expire, and it triggers back in all of those brackets. All of that going on while there's $23.6 billion that's automatically appropriated. That's $23.6 billion of the $105.5 billion that are automatically appropriated, and I say deceptively appropriated, in Obamacare itself. And so we have Obamacare regulations going in place. The roots of Obamacare are going down. The American people are starting to think that we don't have the determination here in this House to repeal Obamacare. I come here, Madam Speaker, to remind you and anybody that might be listening into this deliberation here on the floor of the House that this House has passed the repeal of Obamacare. Every Republican voted to repeal Obamacare. We sent it over to the Senate. The Senate also held a vote, and every Republican in the Senate voted to repeal Obamacare. However, they didn't pass the repeal in the Senate, and so the repeal failed. Well, that had something to do with the President, who has a lot of belief in his signature piece of legislation. His future and his destiny is wrapped up in Obamacare. However, we know that the American people have said they want all of Obamacare ripped out by the roots. They want it gone, lock, stock, and barrel, not one shred, not one DNA particle of Obamacare left behind. The American people understand that Obamacare is a malignant tumor that is metastasizing and consuming the liberty of the American people, and it must be repealed. This House is resolute in the repealing of Obamacare, and we've also passed out of this House with a significant majority the legislation that cuts off all funding that would be used to implement or enforce Obamacare. We did that as a part of the CR that came out of here that finally the President signed. They stripped the cut off of the funding out of that and voted it out in the Senate at the direction of Harry Reid. And so, Madam Speaker, this House is resolute. The American people are resolute. And I will make this prediction that I think needs to be understood, and that is this. If President Obama is reelected in 2012, that will guarantee that all of Obamacare will be implemented and enforced. That operation of its implementation will be completed by 2014. That's kind of the schedule that it's on now. If the President is reelected, we get Obamacare, the law of the land, in perpetuity. If he is not, and we elect another president, a different president, that will be on the foundation that we will repeal Obamacare under the signature of the next President of the United States. I see that the Speaker of the House has arrived on the floor, and I'd be happy to yield to whatever cause that might be.
Let me thank my colleague for yielding. You know, Mr. Speaker,